I love that we got to squeeze in a credit for Sasha Landy, who did, in fact, found Women Who Code. So that's really cool. Diana forgot to thank one person, so I guess I'm going to have to do that. Thank you, Diana. As Diana said, I am Carina Zona. I am the founder of CallbackWomen, and I am a developer evangelist for Ruby Together. You can find me pretty much anywhere on the internet as CC Zona. This talk is a toolkit for empathetic coding. And we're going to be delving into some really specific examples of uncritical programming and really painful results that come from doing things in ways that were very benignly intended but really go astray. And because those are some really sensitive areas, I want to start with a content warning, because we're going to be dealing with a variety of subjects here that are certainly not typical of a tech conference. So infertility, sex shaming, miscarriage, bullying, stalking, grief, PTSD, segregation, racial profiling, white supremacy, and the Holocaust. Just throw that one in there. If you would rather not end your day thinking about these things, it is completely fine to go and enjoy a beverage right now. I will not be insulted, and I think taking care of yourself is actually a really good thing. And these are not the whole point of the talk, but they are subjects that will come up starting in about 10, 15 minutes. You got a little time to think about that. Here we go. Algorithms impose consequences on people all the time. We're able to extract really remarkably precise insights about an individual. So there's this question that we have to ask. Do we have a right to know what they didn't consent to share, even when they have willingly shared data that leads us there? And how do we mitigate against unintended consequences of this? When we talk about the word algorithms, usually we're thinking in terms of mathematics and computer science, right? Patterns of instructions articulated into code or mathematical formulas. But this isn't the only way you can think about it. Okay, like here's our friend bubble sort, right? And this is the typical way that we do think about algorithms. But there's also algorithms as a more generic concept are just step-by-step set of instructions for predictably arriving at an outcome. An outcome, that's all. So for instance, in everyday life, we have all sorts of examples of algorithms that are just patterns of instructions articulated in different ways. For instance, a recipe is an algorithm. Directions on a map is an algorithm. Making a crochet pattern, and I don't ever want to hear about assembly being too hard to read. The algorithms that we're going to look at today are focused on the exhaustive rendering of our conscious and unconscious patterns into data sets and algorithms. This is the core of predictive analytics. Deep learning is something we've heard about in some other talks this week. It is the new hotness right now, obviously, for mining data. And essentially, you can think of it as algorithms for fast, trainable, artificial neural networks. And it's a branch of machine learning that actually has been around in academia for decades, at least since the 1980s. But as far as really being able to use it in production, at scale particularly, has really only been theoretical up until a couple of years ago. And there has been rapid change because of those breakthroughs. Right now, it is becoming possible for industry to extract considerably more sophisticated insights than anything imaginable even 4 years ago, out of the vastness of big data, in production, at scale, today, in such a wide variety of applications. So here's just a really generic way to think about the basic process. You have inputs that are some kind of collection of data. That might be words, images, sounds, objects, even some sort of abstraction. And then this is training data that doesn't even have to be sort of labeled or categorized like we usually think of it, right? We have to mark everything that, like, that's a dog, that's a human, that's a sound. No, you could just throw data at it. And then execution is just running a series of functions repeatedly in a black box, and that word phrase black box is something we're going to come back to. And then outputs are just a prediction of properties that will be useful for drawing intuitions about similar future inputs. And this is really important. The training data set has to be similar to the production data set. If it's not, you're going to immediately have subtle biases that will change the intention and results. So we're going to get back to that later as well. So deep learning relies on artificial neural networks, their automated discovery of patterns within that training data set, and then it applies discoveries to draw those intuitions about future data. And for our industry, what that means is that it's presenting us with breakthroughs for how we even relate to big data and the things that we can do with it. And, like, that's exciting! But notice what it means also. It's premised on a black box. The neural network has drilled down to tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of incredibly subtle factors that it believes have predictive value. These are not things as a human that we would consciously even notice, let alone say this, and those other 7,000 things are what make a prediction here. So this is technology that's driving major advances in so many areas, including medicine, pharmaceutical research, emotion detection, text prediction, face identification, voice activation, like, Siri type of stuff, fraud detection, sentiment analysis, translations, video content recognition, even self-driving cars like Google Auto and Tesla are using this stuff right now. So today we're going to be looking at just a few concrete examples of those, including ones using ad targeting, behavioral prediction, recommendation systems, image classification, and facial recognition. But before we get to sort of those really practical ones, I want to start with a whimsical example. This is Mar.io. It is an artificial neural net that teaches itself to play Super Mario World. It starts with no clue whatsoever. It hasn't been given rules for a game. It's simply been presented with the opportunity to alter values and notices that sometimes something happens as a result. And so in a series of iterations called layers, it just keeps circling back, trying new things and noticing patterns, and each time noticing more and more subtle patterns until by the end of 24 hours, it can play the game. It has taught itself, all from that cumulative observation and nothing else. So it's learned that movement, it's learned that gameplay purely on its own, and then it's using that, right, to come up with insights, not rules, but predictions. So, having looked at one game, let's play one of our own. It looks something like bingo, and it's called Data Mining Fail. It looks like this. Are you ready to play? Are you ready to play? And today, I know I just down a little, thank you. All right, insightful algorithms are full of pitfalls. So it's by looking at case studies that we are able to better explore some of the stuff that's on this board. Some of the ones we're going to play with, Target. Target is a essentially department store based in the US. They have, anything you could possibly need for your home and sometimes for your work as well. Everything from groceries to automotive parts and clothing and household supplies and guns, where it's America. In the retail sector overall, the second trimester of pregnancy is called the Holy Grail. And the reason it's called this is because pregnancy is a moment in time, one of the few moments in our lifetime where all of our spending habits, our loyalties, our brand selections all come up for grabs again. Everything we've been taught, every pattern and habit that we have is suddenly fair game for retailers. And so, of course, they're very interested in determining when is somebody pregnant. But you need to compete, right, with everyone else who's doing that. if you can find that person in their second trimester rather than when it's becoming obvious in their third, then you are the competition that can lock in that customer before any other retailer even has an opportunity. So Target, of course, one day had some marketers go over to one of their programmers and ask a really simple question. If we wanted to figure out if a customer is pregnant, even if she didn't want us to know, could you do that? So just pause and think for a moment. What would you do? How would you solve that problem? What factors would you look for to come up with that prediction? It's an interesting problem. It's a challenge, and we love challenge. So he took the challenge too. And in fact, he did come up with a pretty reliable algorithm for detecting pregnancy in that second trimester before the customer had disclosed it. So they started sending out flyers with coupons for maternity, targeted at exactly these people that they seemed to be doing really well with, until one day a man came into a store and he demanded to see the manager. And the manager came out and the man said, "How dare you send this to my teenage daughter? What are you doing? Are you trying to tell her it's okay to have sex? Are you trying to tell her to get pregnant?" The manager didn't actually have responsibility for a national chain of stores and their advertising, but he apologized anyway. And the man went away. The next day the man comes back, he demands to see the manager again. And the man says, "I'm so sorry. I had a conversation with my daughter last night, and she is pregnant." Is it funny, though? This is a moment in a person's life that is big, and announcing it is particularly big. What they stole from her is her timing, her opportunity to have a calm conversation with a parent instead of one that is angry, being able to choose when that happens and how. A retailer trying to move ahead of the competition stole one of the most important moments of her life. So, having gotten other feedback similar to this, Target decided to shift its strategy a bit. The new strategy is to send out to the same people a flyer full of coupons, but to couch it in completely unrelated things so they don't know that they have been targeted for maternity advertising. So, your ad for baby stuff might be wrapped up with some ads for cologne and, tire care, whatever it is. And the rationale for this is, as long as a pregnant woman thinks she hasn't been spied on, as long as we don't spook her, it works. This is an algorithm disrupting a person's life in profound ways. And is this the ethical stance that we want to take? Is that it's okay to surveil someone and distort their life as long as they don't know who's doing it? Shutterfly. Shutterfly basically sells various printed goods, right? Cards, photos, etc. At one point, they send out this message saying to people, as a new parent, hey, now that you have had a baby, you owe everyone in your life apparently a card. You send out thank you cards, birth announcements, all that other stuff. Some people were not actually the target audience, and some of those people laughed, you think so, huh? It was not funny for everybody, though. Thanks, Shutterfly, for the congratulations on my new bundle of joy. I'm horribly infertile, but hey, I'm adopting a kitten, so. I lost a baby in November who would have been due this week. It was like hitting a wall all over again. Shutterfly's response to this kind of criticism was that the intent of the email was to target customers who've recently had a baby. Yes, we know your intent. That's not the point. Mark Zuckerberg became a father last year, and he and his wife, in announcing that upcoming birth, with obviously great excitement, also revealed a series of miscarriages that had preceded it. And he wrote, "You feel so hopeful when you learn you're going to have a child. You start imagining who they'll become and dreaming of hopes for their future. You start making plans, and then they're gone. It's a lonely experience." Facebook. Speaking of Facebook. Probably most of us are familiar with Year in Review. It's been around for a number of years. In December, sometimes it's been algorithmic, sometimes it's been more curated, but in some way presenting you with, hey, in the past year, here's some things to remember. What they fail to take into account with this is that our lives are constantly changing. Things happen like changes of jobs and relationships, and the way we felt about them at one point in time may not be anymore how we feel about them now. What was something once joyous may have become very different for us emotionally along the way. Eric Meyer coined the term inadvertent algorithmic cruelty, and he defines this as the result of code that works in the overwhelming majority of cases, but doesn't take into account other use cases. So why does he get to be the one who makes up this name? Because he's one of the people it happened to. This is a picture of my 6-year-old daughter who is dead, who died this year. The Year in Review ad keeps coming up in my feed, rotating through different fun and fabulous backgrounds, as if celebrating her death, and there's no obvious way to stop it. Eric calls on us to increase awareness of and consideration for the failure modes, the worst case scenarios, the edge cases, and that's what I'm trying to do here today, and I hope that you will carry forward to others. So with that in mind, here is my first recommendation for all of us to take to heart. Be humble. We cannot intuit inner state, emotions, private subjectivity. Not yet, anyway. Eric's blog post was in December of 2014, and it garnered a tremendous amount of attention, not just within the industry, but also in mainstream media. How does Facebook or anyone else avoid blindsiding someone with unpleasant stuff annually? This is something obviously 2 years ago they must have given a lot of thought to. They certainly had to answer a lot of questions. And so, 3 months later, they did make a change. They introduced a new feature called On This Day, basically just reminding you of trivial fun stuff. 5 years ago, you became Facebook friends with a person here. 2 years ago, you went hiking. A year ago, you had dim sum. And it's accompanied by this, really nice message. We care about you. We get it this time, Here's this nice memory from 3 years ago that we think you're really going to like. Puppy. Who doesn't like a puppy? I know it's not a cat, but come on, it's a puppy. On this day, you posted this really adorable picture. Thanks, Facebook, for picking today to hit me with this dumb feature and remind me that my dog died 3 years ago. Sometimes Facebook's On This Day sends me memories from high school, and it's triggering. I did not enjoy high school, and I need to forget. You do not get to decide what parts of my past I keep fresh in my mind and which parts I walk away from. Fuck off. This has impact for people. They care. We have to learn from mistakes. Facebook chose to take those lessons and do the same thing. We have to learn from our mistakes, and we have to learn from others. We have to decide that harmless and harmful are not consequences that balance out. Fitbit. commonly known activity tracker, right? Social dimension, compete with your friends on how many miles you jog. Oh, sorry, meters. Right, American. How much weight you're losing, all that kind of stuff, right? When Fitbit started out, it also had another thing. It had a sex tracker, another one to compete on. The difference is it was default public. Yeah, you're reading closely, aren't you? I am also a sex educator, and I'm both really happy for you and really concerned. Public. This was a failure to think about the data itself, treating all data as equal. If you want to compete on one thing, surely you want to compete on every data point possible. We need to be thinking about context, and we need to be thinking about what data we're collecting and the personal meaning it has for people. And certainly to be thinking about what data is private. If you're applying the same algorithm to every bit of data, there's already a problem. So most of us have some kind of internal ops tools, right? Like, that's inevitable. It might be for monitoring, performance tuning, business metrics, whatever it is. Uber's is called GodView in their infinite humility. Uber didn't limit access to just admins or restrict it just to operational use. Employees could freely identify any passenger in the system, monitor that person's movements. Even drivers used to have access to GodView records too. Even a job applicant was welcome to access these private individuals' records. Meanwhile, managers felt free to abuse GodView for completely non-operational purposes, such as, I'm not kidding, stalking celebrities' rides in real time and showing that off as party entertainment. These algorithms were created for legitimate reasons, but algorithms can be abused, and it's up to us to make sure that abuse is not possible, and that what we are making, that we're checking on, what is this for? So OkCupid is a dating site, and they used to be really into their metrics, and they'd blog about all the things that they were learning from looking at aggregate trend data. And that blog really was focused on sharing insights into simple ways that as an OkCupid user, you could use the site to achieve the goal you're there for, right? To date better, to date more effectively. Uber also used to blog about their data. A crucial difference is in how they approached it, because this was not about improving customers' experience of Uber's service. In fact, if you look very closely, Uber can and does track your one-night stands. This is purely invading people's privacy for no operational reason, no legitimate business reason at all, but purely for the sake of judging and shaming. This is not a predictable consequence of signing up for a rideshare account. Google Adwords. So several years ago, a researcher at Harvard was Googling her own name. And she was surprised to see that when she did so, that there was an ad on the side of the results that said something to the effect of, would you like to see LaTanya Sweeney's jail records, her arrest records? As someone who doesn't have arrest records, she found that interesting and was curious to see why that happens. And so she did a study in which there were two sets of names. One's highly correlated with white people, one's very correlated with black people, and divided them by gender and assigned these to the names, last names of real academics. And then Googled them and saw what AdWords were displayed. A black identifying name was 25% more likely to result in an ad that implied an arrest record. Ads like these. The algorithm of AdWords, if you recall, focuses purely on predicting what we'll click on. It has no knowledge of the real world. That's not the point. The point is to predict what we'll click on and to motivate us to click. The real world is absolutely irrelevant. And it bases that prediction on what it knows about us and what it's observed from others in aggregate. So what we see here is our collective bias being both reflected back to us and reinforced to us. Data is generated by people. It's not objective. It's constrained by our tunnel vision, and it replicates our flaws. It echoes our perceptions. Twitter. Joan McNeill coined the term accidental algorithmic run-ins, and as you can guess, she was inspired by Eric's definition. Now, she wasn't giving a formal definition, but you can roughly summarize this as classifying people as similar, where careless prompts create scenarios that are harder to control and prepare for. And there are a variety of different ways that you can see this manifest. For instance, being trapped by a similarity algorithm that's determined to associate you with someone who is similar in some respect, but who you would never actually give conscious permission to associate you with. So, for instance, being associated with a white supremacist. True story. There's more than one person in the world named William Johnson. LinkedIn has this really nifty news feature where it just pops in and announces to all your links, here's a news article that we believe is about you. Wouldn't you like to congratulate me, William Johnson, on your great new success as a white supremacist? If you look really closely, in the little gray print is wrong person. The burden is on you to belatedly catch their error and correct it. And what he learned is it takes a while. It's not even click on it and it goes away. And of course, the announcement has already gone out to all those individuals. I don't even know what to characterize this as. I think hubris is the minimum that we can call this. An accidental algorithmic run-in is a type of false positive. Often that falsity and harm cannot easily be detected algorithmically. If you're stalked by a former coworker, Twitter may reinforce this connection, algorithmically boxing you into a past that you're trying to move on from. Your affinity score with that harasser just grows higher and higher with every person who follows, at Twitter's recommendation, that person. This is a common problem that people have reported, things like their ex that they no longer want to deal with, and the fact that they have had these overlapping circles becomes a circle that you're trapped in, and becomes the person that you would least personally recommend is the person that Twitter is most determined to recommend. And notice that much like Adwords, that these things just are really doubling down on that false certainty every time a third party takes action. You don't have control. Random people with no knowledge of the impact are the ones who inadvertently have that control. Notice that just like Eric's experience, there's no escape. Flickr and Google Photos. Facial recognition. At its finest, right? This is iPhotos, and when it was starting out, it was a teeny bit flawed. And like we saw along the way, lots of humorous mistakes, right? It took a while for this to start getting good. And this obviously is a really harmless mistake. Nobody's going to be harmed by the fact that their biscuit has been misjudged. A false positive like this is really easy to chuckle at. Here's another kind of that same category. This is a site from a couple of years ago. Microsoft called it howold.net. And it's using deep learning to just take facial recognition to, kind of next level by drawing intuitions based on a face about age and gender. So it's assigning these tags that you can see here, and notice this is the same person who apparently is simultaneously a whole lot of ages and genders. Not nearly enough genders, but hey. It's inevitable that as these technologies are growing and progressing, that there always are going to be some mistakes along the way, right? That's accepted. And these are the kind of mistakes that when you look at it, it's more intriguing, right? Like, how did it come up with that particular choice then, rather than something that you're thinking about as something to worry about. And then some false positives are not funny at all, such as this next one. Flickr classified this as children's playground equipment. .go. And I want you to notice something else here, because those gray tags are the photographers. The white tags are Flickrs. This is a consequence of algorithmic hubris, treating human understanding, the photographer's own knowledge of where they were and what they saw, and throwing that out in favor of an algorithm's belief system. Treating data as inherently neutral when clearly there will be many circumstances in which it isn't. Flickr likewise tagged him as an animal. Originally it tagged him also as an ape. That's a comparison that is a particularly ugly history. It is not merely wrong, it is deeply offensive. So I want to be clear for a moment here that this is not about picking on any of these individual companies or a coder behind them or even a methodology. This is about more than, say, just artificial neural nets. This is big picture. There will always be new breakthroughs, and we will always make these same kind of mistakes, fall into these same pitfalls over and over again, unless we take different approaches. Here is Google Photos 1 month after those last two examples. Again, the comparison to a gorilla. It's accidental, but it couldn't be worse. So how does this even happen? It's really doubtful that there was some engineer who was like, hey, let's take all the black people and label them as gorillas. That'll be hilarious. No. For one answer, you can go all the way back to the 1940s. Kodak Eastman was developing a color film emulsion, and we're talking about America in a period where racial segregation was still the norm, where they were making conscious choice about whether to market to white people or black people. Who is the preferential market for our product? And unsurprisingly, they chose white people. So long before computers, we had algorithms, and film developing is grounded in an algorithm. Every day, lab technicians had an image like this, called a Shirley card, and every day you would take a photo, process the film, and make sure that the results were registering the colors the same amount of detail, and if you didn't, then you needed to recalibrate your machine. So this becomes the reference for exactly how your film should be performing. It treated black skin as irrelevant. The important thing is to produce fine detail in white skin, light tones, all lightness. All of which means that our development processes have to respond to this legacy that's generations old. Because even when digital imaging started being developed in the 60s and 70s, it followed this same pattern. And when you had digital photography emerging, likewise, it followed the same pattern. And if it didn't, think about what would have happened. Consumers would have seen images look completely different than they're used to, taking pictures side by side, and would have said, wow, this technology sucks. So we keep carrying it forward. Every image set that we mine is inherently compromised by this lossy data that's produced even now under the weight of deeply flawed algorithms 70 years old. The tools used to make film, the science of it, are not racially neutral. And that presents us with a hard problem. A really hard problem. So it's really easy to decide to avoid thinking about it at all. And so it continues on and on. Affirm is a credit lending startup. It's from one of the founders of PayPal. It is not microlending, but it is lending for specific products rather than here's a credit card, buy whatever you want. And its special feature is that it's all algorithmically deciding who is a good credit risk, rather than conventional methods where, like you demonstrate various things that prove you're good at paying bills, right? Algorithms are gatekeepers to all sorts of stuff, not just credit, but also things like housing and jobs. What's new in this is not like those previous methods are also algorithms, don't forget, right? Like we say, if we look at this, and this, we know something at the end. We have an outcome. These are just different algorithms that we're now applying. The big difference, though, is now we're applying algorithms in a black box. We don't know anymore what the algorithm is. It's what's deciding who gets access to jobs and housing and credit. Traditional banks and their regulators have been really paying close attention to these new models. Firms and others, they're evaluating how to adopt the same strategies. And so this is a really good time to look at what those strategies are and the impacts that they have. A firm makes an assessment of creditworthiness based on just a few factors: your name, your email, your mobile number, your birthday, and your government ID number. And sometimes, usually they make a judgment right there, snap on those three things. But sometimes they feel like they need a little more, so they'll ask for something like your GitHub account and use that as the seventh criteria. How many people here have a GitHub account? Right? How many people generally in the world have a GitHub account? Yeah. Okay, so this is already selecting on privilege, and it's selecting on a really particular niche of the world. It also looks at things like behavioral factors, like how long the person takes to remember those, all 6 factors. Behavioral. It's a really interesting way to phrase it. Remember Sal's talk about neurodiversity. There's all sorts of reasons why someone may need to take a pause while writing those things down. Some of them are because of ordinary distraction. Some of them are because you're Stephen Hawking and maybe it takes you a little time to type. Apparently he's a bad credit risk. These are algorithms all reinforcing privilege. Let's go back to that original description. An algorithm is just a procedure for reliably arriving at some outcome. What is the outcome here? To reliably predict that people in a very narrow niche with a heck of a lot of privilege are going to get credit. You know what? They were already going to get credit. Who's locked out of this? It's up to us to take into account impacts that our algorithms lead to. The outcome here is just identifying reliably people who can pay their bills, not people who will. And it's reliably excluding most people who just simply don't have an abundance of privilege to tap into. Alan Turing reminds us that if a machine is expected to be infallible, it cannot also be intelligent. The immense power of machine intuition is irreplaceable. That is no doubt. We have moved far beyond wanting to. And I'm not suggesting that we should, but it's not a replacement for comprehension. A firm analyzes applicants' social media accounts. As I said, they're not the only ones. So do some other companies. For instance, in 2012, you may recall that Germany's largest credit rating agency considered evaluating applicants' Facebook relationships as a credit criterion. Facebook friends. A personal friend isn't necessarily the same as a Facebook friend, right? Like, we know this. Apparently, they didn't. But what about when a Facebook friend is generally a friend? Facebook defended a patent a few years ago that pushes even further than all these other models do, because its patent is for making credit decisions about a person based on the completely unrelated credit history of their Facebook friends. Not just association, but completely what someone else does. Here's an algorithm with potential to deeply intrude on and alter your real-life relationships simply to avoid being financially shamed and punished by an algorithm. The founder of Affirm says, it's important to maintain the discipline of not trying to explain too much. Adding human assumptions could introduce bias into the data analysis. What? Dude, data is not objective. Data always has bias, inherent at minimum in how it's collected and interpreted. Very beginning, those inputs, and then every flaw and assumption in that training data set and the original functions all are, of course, going to have unrecognized influence on algorithms and those outcomes that they generate. Affirm says that its algorithm assesses 70,000 traits out of, remember, those 6 data points. How many of those have potential for discriminatory outcomes? How would anyone even know? It's not like someone can tell you what criteria led to a decision. Rationales for the algorithm can only be seen from inside the black box. So I took a photo of the inside of a really, really black box. Now we know. Making lending decisions inside a black box is not a radical new business model. It's a regression. What is disrupting is fairness, accountability, and oversight. Sarah May says many regulations are in place to correct for systemic structural bias against minority groups. Ask yourselves, do you want to be part of that disruption? The reality is algorithms always have underlying assumptions, of course, about meaning, about accuracy, about the world in which the data was generated, about how code should assign meaning to it at all. Underlying assumptions influence outcomes and consequences being generated. And yet, Thoreau reminds us, the universe is wider than our view of it. Our industry is in an arms race right now. Major players are rolling out products that make big bets on black box algorithms and those opaque intuitions. And the pace of implementation is moving so fast. It's imperative that we make decisions right now as an industry about ethical and practical processes for going forward with this well. For the moment, outcomes are clearly varying in quality, but recall that these innovations are all about drawing predictive intuitions at extremely fine-grained levels fast. And what that means is that they're growing ever more precise in correctness and ever more damaging in wrongness. So that's the dilemma for us. We care about getting this stuff right. We wouldn't be in this room if we didn't. We want to be empathetic coders. So how do we flip the paradigm? Here are some starting points. Consider decisions' potential impacts on others. How might a false positive affect someone, such as those Shutterfly customers or Twitter users? How might a false negative affect someone, for instance, being denied that loan or being declared a white supremacist? How many ways can an algorithm's intuition be superficially correct and yet deeply wrong about human context in which it's drawing from, like that photo of Dachau or like that reminder of Eric Meyer's daughter? Project the likelihood of consequences to others. Minimize negative consequences to others. Did you hear me keep saying others, others, others? We're so good at anticipating how things can go wrong or well for our mission, for our company, for our product, for our features. What we're not so good about is remembering to think about impacts on others. That we need to bring into the room. I think the medical profession's philosophy of do no harm is one that we can adopt. It's a framework for thinking about this stuff. Another, we need to be honest and we need to be trustworthy. And this is not just about, hey, we want to be nice people. It's because it's the right thing to do, period, yes, but also because it's necessary as a business issue. We will make big mistakes on this stuff. If Google and Facebook and all these others can, be assured the rest of us can too. So we need to be able to essentially build currency, to be able to say when that happens, this was an honest mistake, and we are genuinely sorry, we are fixing it now, and we have earned your trust, I hope, to be able to recover from this and move forward. And that's why we also need to make sure that we're building in recourse for people to be able to easily correct conclusions that were wrong. What if Eric Meyer would have been able to say simply, click, not a happy memory. Provide others with full disclosure of limitations of what we've made, what we do. Call attention to signs of risk of harm. There's always limitations in what we make, and we're okay with that, right? It's targeting a particular problem in a particular context with particular assumptions and target audience, and it's accepting that there's always going to be some sort of amount of flaws and imprecision. All of that's expected and okay, and I'm not challenging that whatsoever. But we need to make it clear to consumers what those limitations are, that they have the same understanding of scope that we do. This is a chicken breast. This is an activity tracker on a chicken breast. This is an excerpt from a great video by Emily Gorsensky giving a talk that is on similar issues related to Internet of Things. This activity tracker's heart rate monitor is detecting a nice steady pulse of 119 beats per minute from the chicken breast. Come on, funny. Until you know that a woman was recently convicted of a crime based on the pulse rate data evidence from her activity tracker's heart rate monitor. These devices were never designed to be precision scientific instruments, not even close, right? Essentially, those algorithm sensors were more or less designed to capture some data, to give some sort of sense of trend that doesn't even have to be objectively, compared with others. It's just about the level from day to day using this sensor does or does not change within a reasonable bound, right? That's really all it is. In some respects, they're an entertainment product more than a science product. They were certainly never meant to be used as criminal evidence. Yet the public has taken to heart our industry's conviction that algorithms' inputs are always precise, their outputs are always precise, and beyond question, that what we do is science. It's important that we communicate with them about each algorithm's realistic limitations, because they are depending on things that are not real. We need to be visionaries about creating more ways to counteract biased data, biased analyses, biased impacts. And when I say bias, I don't necessarily mean discrimination. I mean skew, things that are different from the reality that they expect to be covering. We need to anticipate diverse ways to screw up. This we will do. As long as the teams who are charged with defining data collection and data use and analysis are less diverse than the intended user base, we're going to keep on failing. That is a certainty. We have to have decision-making authority in the hands of highly diverse teams. Not just diverse, but highly diverse teams. Culture fit is the antithesis of diversity. It's superficial variations being allowed to exist, no more. Their unique perspective is suppressed because, hey, the actual point of culture fit is to avoid disruption of groupthink. Unidimensional variety is not diversity either. This is variety. It's wildly varied on as many different dimensions as you could possibly find. Differing origins, ages, assumptions, experiences, backgrounds, where there is no longer a majority to identify at all. Do we have our teams looking like this? Because the target audience, when we say we want a global audience, sure does. Audit outcomes constantly, because again, Outcomes are all we can see. So what do I mean by that? In housing and job search, this is a pretty common, proven technique used in a variety of fields. Basically what you do is you make two identical applications of something like, say, that application for a fellowship or a job or a mortgage, whatever, and you just change one attribute. Just one thing. Sometimes that's been things like just change the name or the gender or the implicit race, whatever it is, and you send those two applications into the black box. And in the past, obviously, the black box is essentially like that landlord or whoever it is who would be evaluating. In this case, the one evaluating is the black box, right? And then look at the outcome. Because if bias doesn't exist, these are identical applications, right? They should have identical outcomes. If they don't, then we have discovered that somewhere in this system, bias exists. It gives us a starting point for investigation. So while we clearly can't audit every possible contingency, there are some where certainly we do know to check. Things where there's like regulatory issues where we actively know that these are things you can't discriminate about. Certainly always audit for those. Anything that's protected by law is the bare minimum of what we should be looking for. But you can also look for subtler clues. What is the system implicitly ascribing meaning to? For instance, is, say, a difference of family name or personal peril being read as something else, as an attribute of character, for instance? Rule of thumb here is unless you can draw a complete decision tree for every possible combination of inputs leading to every possible output, audit. That's your bottom line. If you can't do that, then you must be auditing outcomes. It's all we've got. So what does that entail? Earlier, remember that Google Adwords study? That is an example of what I'm talking about. That's outcome auditing. Here's another one. It's a Carnegie Mellon University tool called AdFisher. It generates completely pristine Google histories and then lets Google respond with job ads. And it's interesting because it showed that high-pay jobs were shown to 600% more men compared to women. Crowdsource as much as possible. Our teams are always limited in our knowledge and perspective. Take advantage of the fact that the crowd has far more imagination to offer and knowledge. These case studies really highlight for us that mining social data is full of all these pitfalls, and they just can't all be solved by technology alone, and so we don't have to. We could take advantage of non-technological ways of gathering knowledge. ANN's, there's this crude approximation of the brain's ability to constantly develop sophisticated algorithms. We're doing it every day, so why not bring the real thing in? This is an excerpt from a talk by Heather Rivers, who at the time was at Yammer. The talk is called Linguistic Potluck. Yammer, for a long time, has been crowdsourcing internationalization and translations. So you notice here you have just a standard display, but at the bottom you can choose to translate, provide a translation to Yammer. And then what's important here is that that translation is not immediately accepted. It's for the rest of the crowd to then evaluate the truth or falsity of this. So you constantly have this refinement of data, and you also have some checks on people trying to game the system or just being wrong. Google has a similar app called Crowdsource, highly original name. It's being used to do checks on things like Street View, Google Keyboard, Translate. The important thing here is this is a data gathering thing, right? So if I said that data gathering has potential for biases, one of the ways that this one has problems with bias is that they are imprecise in communicating what it is they're looking for. And so you have a variety of ways in which you get skew. For instance, some of the users believe what they're essentially doing is providing a dictionary definition. So they're giving you like the whole list rather than a translation. It's here is a reference manual. Other times, they sort of treat it as like they're talking back to someone, like, hey, engineer, this is approximately something like my loved one. Sometimes they're just trolling. Sometimes they're really trolling. And sometimes the trolling is about deliberately injecting prejudice. Think for a moment about a sentence construction in which immigrant becomes Mehmet. this can really be poisoning the well, which is why you need to have those checks. Cultivate informed consent. Ask for permission with the default being no. Focus on all those people who do want to share themselves, who are enthusiastic about giving consent, to be known better. They want to be known. They want to be able to get the best features and best discounts, have the greatest experience of our apps, be served best. There's lots of people. There's no reason why we have to start by coercing people. Facebook has been making a lot of adjustments recently on this day and year in review. Now they ask questions like, do you want to use this feature? Hey, that's a good one. Do you want to edit its choices? Which people don't you want to be reminded of? Which dates? Which posts? Which sounds pretty good, right? It's better than what we saw earlier. It's effort. It's well-intended. It misses the big picture anyway, because these newer, gentler features are all premised on list everything you don't want to think about. Think up a list of every single thing ever that you don't want to ever think about. Why should I have to dig up what hurts me to fend off an algorithm at all? What they're doing is still fundamentally opt out, not opt in. Examples of opt out are things like having to block what we have put out there, or having an ignore, or a filter, or a disable. In some way, the default is on and it's up to us to change it. Opt-in means you start with something like, I will choose to follow, I will choose to view this, I will choose to select or enable this. Why not just let something like Twitter viewers select the people that they recommend you follow? We do this anyway. It's called Follow Friday, right? Like, a lot of people have already given their actual recommendations. Why does Twitter need to come up with this stuff as a guesstimate when precise data is available? Another way you can do it is have a checkbox, right? Like, all those pregnant people actually, I think, probably would be excited about having some coupons. Why not ask people? And the great thing is, if you ask people, you get not just a pregnant person, but other people who have a stake in the pregnancy, right? Like, there's probably people who want to buy gifts and stuff. This is a better method, a more effective business method. Instead of prying, we can get people to come to us. It's a win. And this is why we also need to commit to data transparency and algorithmic transparency. And this is the one where I know it's the most hard conversation to have internally, because so many companies think that proprietary everything is the secret sauce. It's the win. If we reveal stuff, then, oh no. And I see the sort of comparison is that, it wasn't that long ago that we were fighting for legitimacy of using open source in our work, and we made some similar arguments, right, about transparency as part of the value of this. And we pushed hard, we won, we were right, we can do that again. We're the professionals. We know that transparency is crucial for drawing insights that are genuine and useful. So at least start the conversation. We don't have to win it today, but at least start it. Argue for increasing transparency because it's for the sake of a better product. It's for the sake of cleaner features, it's for fewer bugs, and for stronger tests, and for happier users, and for public trust, and to be able to make more money, because we're building stuff that matters. Amy Hoy is really harsh here, but I think she's really right. If your product has to do with something that deeply affects people, either care or quit. Go live in a cave, don't hurt other people. It is so easy to unthinkingly build an app full of this data mining fail, because building differently requires awareness, critical thinking, and requires, most of all, deciding as a team to take a stance to say, hey, listen, this is the deal. We don't build things here without understanding consequences to users. This is just our way. This is our process. It's a good one. We are hired for more than just a code. We're not code monkeys. We're hired as professionals in problem solving. Our role is to be opinionated about how to make code serve a problem space well. This is our actual profession, applying expertise and judgment about how to solve problems. This is the argument we can make. When we're asked to write code that presumes to intuit people's internal life and act on those assumptions as professionals, we have to be users' proxies, be their advocates, say no on their behalf to using their data in ways that they've not knowingly and enthusiastically consented to. Say no to uncritically reproducing systems that have bias built into them. Say no to writing code that imposes unauthorized consequences onto their lives. In short, refuse to play along. Thank you.